So let me welcome everybody here to the workshop, and we're hoping to have a bit of a less formal discussion today, and we're hoping that we can perhaps engage in a bit of an interview, engage the participants as well in the discussion around what can be done to create a just, equitable and sustainable recovery from the pandemic, but with a particular focus on how we can use last year's ILO resolution, like the resolution number 1 that was adopted at the International Labour Conference in 2021, how we can use that as both trade unions and social movements to try and engage governments in change in economic policy and a bit of a change in direction as they develop their COVID recovery plans, and the way that they can be formed through social dialogue, importantly, and with the input of important contributions from unions, but also from economists and civil society who have a number of inputs into the way that we can shift the current economic orthodoxy. So what we're planning to do today is, first of all, we're going to outline a little bit about the resolution itself, and then go into a conversation with the former director at UN-ESCAP of the Macroeconomic division. So somebody who has many years of experience within the UN system. He's held a number of positions, but particularly in this meeting, I think it's important to note that he was the director of the Macroeconomic division at UN-ESCAP, Enebish Chowdhury. So we're very pleased to have him here with us, but also extremely happy that he's been working with PSI to develop a proposal around the way that this particular resolution can be implemented. Some significant work to put together a fairly comprehensive document for us that helps outline both the problems that countries face in terms of their fiscal policy, their monetary policy, and their industrial policy, and how they can reorient those policies to enable a more equitable and sustainable recovery. And that's been a very helpful policy paper for PSI that we intend to help share with our affiliates as they engage governments. And today is a bit of a soft launch of that paper. We are hoping that it will be available up on our website soon, and we really wanted to share it during this APPFSD meeting. So I am going to provide a little bit of a short overview in terms of what the resolution is. I hope it won't take too long, and then we'll go into the conversation. And then we will also have time. We're going to hear from one of our affiliates and also representing the Confederation of Mongolian Trade Unions. We'll hear from Brother Amarsanaa about the way that unions in Mongolia have been able to engage government and try and frame the COVID recovery plan, and the way that they use social dialogue and this resolution to discuss economic policy. So I thought it was important to provide an example as we then move to making recommendations to the APPFSD, as these workshops have all been charged to do. And then we'll go back and ensure that these are part of the formal statements that are submitted. So let me just share my screen properly. I'll just share now. So as I said, the resolution that is framing the work that Anis has done for us was adopted last year. So of course, when it's a IL's International Labour Conference resolution, it means that it has been shaped and adopted by governments, but also by unions and employers, or workers and employers. And this is, of course, the unique thing about the ILO, in that it's a tripartite body, which in my opinion, gives it an added advantage and sometimes produces a bit more progressive, perhaps, focused resolutions. But I really believe that it's possible for all of civil society to use this and other instruments of the ILO broadly. So this is the global call to action for a human-centred recovery from the pandemic, and emphasising that it should be inclusive, sustainable and resilient. Importantly, I think that this resolution was the resolution is focuses on, of course, decent work, and it covers a number of elements, all of the elements of decent work, and emphasises a range of barriers to decent work that workers have experienced during the pandemic. But it then goes on to talk about the need for social dialogue, effective social dialogue, and recognising trade union rights. The resolution is split into these 4 components. We're going to focus a bit more on inclusive economic growth and employment, and exactly what is being called for in that element today, because of the work that we've asked ANIS to do, has really focused in on economic policy. But we do also intend to release a more general guide on how the resolution can be used, and the other elements to the resolution. So of course it includes protection of all workers, so ensuring that all the elements of decent work are respected, but also addressing the issues that have arisen, like occupational health and safety, ensuring that all workers have access to vaccines, addressing the fact that workers have had to work extensive hours, others have experienced precarious work, and so forth. So all of the elements there are important. The universal social protection, which we think is critical to focus on rebuilding through public services, and that's part of the resolution. And then the element of social dialogue. In terms of the element that ANIS is going to talk more about, this is the inclusive economic growth and employment. And what it says there is that governments should adopt supportive macroeconomic, fiscal and industrial policies that also foster equity and stability. So in effect, this is monetary, fiscal and industrial policies. And what it's charging governments with the responsibility of doing is assessing whether those existing policies are enabling equity or are they growing inequity, and therefore reorienting those policies towards a more equitable economic environment. And that is what we'll talk more about. Just a few other elements that I wanted to highlight. I think the important component here is that governments are committing to develop these COVID recovery plans. And it's our opportunity. We believe this is our opportunity to engage in social dialogue with governments around what they should be. And that is exactly what the resolution says, is that they should be developed with social partners. And importantly, it also says that those plans, there should be capacity building provided to unions and social actors to be able to engage in the process of shaping those plans, and that the plans should also be at the local level and sectoral level. And we hope to provide capacity building to our affiliates, but it does say that all social partners should be providing that and ensuring that they can really engage in the process. We think that it opens the door to a move away from neoliberal policies, and that's why it's important to us to use the resolution and not leave it as just rhetoric, which unfortunately many resolutions are just words on paper and adopted and not utilised effectively. So that's why this work is being done, in order to ensure that we use the opportunity that opens the door to a criticism of neoliberal policy, but more importantly, to adopt alternatives. We see the importance in the elements there that emphasise greater investment in public services, but particularly care, health care, but also other forms of social care. And the element in the resolution that calls for solidarity, and of course, solidarity is an international legal principle that's often overlooked. And so that means that recognising the importance and the need to support countries who have already experienced reductions in fiscal and monetary policy space and facing debt crisis. And so these policies that we'll talk about today are both at that global level, where a number of countries have been required to adopt or forced to adopt policies that have not been supportive of workers or addressing the inequality crisis through external processes of, particularly of taking on debt and policy advice. So that's a bit of a summary of the resolution. I'll stop sharing there and start with the conversation with Anis. So maybe I'll just start off by asking Anis, with this resolution and the three elements that we've talked about, the importance of adopting fiscal, monetary, and industrial policies that foster greater equity, what do you see as the prospects for unions in engaging governments, and where do you think they should start with, I guess, with their own policy analysis on a country level, and then maybe later on we can talk about the global level. So let's start first with, what do you think the problems that that countries currently face that need to be addressed? And Anis, you need to turn.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Kate, first of all, for asking me to do this paper for the PSI to flush out the implications or practicality of that resolution, what it means in terms of implementation. And for the benefit of our friends, the colleagues in the union movement, one thing I need to emphasize time and again is that when the new liberal policy, or as you mentioned, or the orthodox or current policy, if you just avoid labeling or things like that, the policy paradigm that has been dominant for last 4 decades or so, it has been there, but it has come to dominance from late 70s and early 80s. And it has created an aura of that these policy advice coming from a very rigorous analytical work. They are empirically grounded. And the way they forcefully they place it, and many of the people know, even professional economists nowadays, especially the younger generation who are not exposed to the history, and these are all deliberate, that from the universities, economic history subjects are removed. And so, the students are given only one narrative. And so it becomes a kind of an article of faith. Okay, and this is the main problem now. We have to now, it's a very uphill battle, because for 40 years, the brainwashing that has happened among the professional economists and the union movement, coming from not so much of the background in economics and history. So I would like to emphasize this point very much for the benefit of our friends. For example, I give you an example. The inflation has to be within, for the developed countries, 2%, or for the developing countries, not more than 5%. And some of the developing countries central bankers are even talking about even lower than that, closer to the developed country thing. So assuming that they are the benchmark, if developed countries are targeting inflation at 2% or less, there must be something good about it because they are developed countries, they are smarter than us, that's why they are developed. Why not we also try that? And believe me or not, where from this 2% come? And New Zealand, Central Bank of New Zealand, Reserve Bank of New Zealand adopted it. And the then governor, Don Brash, in his memoir, wrote it very clearly. It was just plucked from the air. There was no empirical, no analytical work to justify that 2% is the inflation that is optimal. And if anything goes over 2%, the sky will fall. And historically,
sorry, Anna said right now, of course, the world is talking about inflation, right?
There is. That's why I'm talking about. Same with the debt and fiscal. Now, this 60% that IMF always talks about, and especially it comes from the EU, and then the 3% budget deficit, 3% of the GDP. Again, these are all plucked from the air. That 60% figure came at the time of Maastricht Treaty. They looked at what are the debt level of those member countries, prospective member countries. They looked around the table, and most of them had budget, debt to GDP ratio around that figure. So it was a matter of convenience that, okay, we go with it. So again, it is the EU member countries at that point in time in history, that was the level, and they thought it was practical to adopt that, which is perfectly sensible. But then it becomes a sort of a target that everybody has to, just like law of gravity. This is what we have to fight. Then, so just to summarize, let me
go back there, and because this is not something I think that unions and some social movements have engaged closely with, is the monetary policy and the way that central banks have framed their policies around the idea of keeping inflation down, right? So, and can you just say a bit more about what are the consequences? What happens when the issue of inflation is the primary way of organising that part of the economic policy, monetary policy?
Yeah. So what happens actually in that case? Again, I have to broaden the discussion a bit, but I come to your question more specifically. Then central banks are given mandate and within independence that this is your only goal. And then the academics started doing research. Is inflation low in countries where they are targeting inflation with central bank independence? And the measure of success for the central bankers is very easy now. You have given me this responsibility and I got your inflation down. And what happened, collateral damages along the way? By the way, the inflation for the inflation targeting countries and non-targeting countries, the difference is very marginal. So, but when you ask, say, a central bank governor of Indonesia or Bangladesh, whatever, and they will say, well, I have given this responsibility and I have delivered that responsibility. So it's fine. And what happens? It's not my business, but you cannot have that. If you look at the IMF's article of agreement, article number 4, which is when the IMF goes to the country, this is the legal basis of IMF going to the country. The preamble of that article 4 says the country's economic policy should be, I'm not saying word for word, but to the effect, should be it should be aimed or something like that for orderly economic growth. Let me say first word is orderly economic growth with reasonable price stability. With reasonable, okay. The word, not specific. With reasonable price stability, taking into account country-specific circumstances. So it's not every country can have the same situation, like every country should have 2% or 5%. Mm. So this is still the IMF's mandate. So when IMF goes, our friends in the union movement and social movement should have that article number 4 preamble in their hand, saying that, look, this is what so you are actually violating your own constitution. Mm. The advice you are giving is against the article of agreement. Okay, the second article of agreement that they violate is the capital account liberalization, that you allow short-term capital to come in and out at the will. Mm. In article number 6, is contradicts article number 6. The article number 6 says capital account management is a sovereign right of a country. So, so now coming back to your specific question, when you are targeting inflation or price stability, very simple. And don't take an offense if I'm sounding too pedantic and trying to teach the kids. No, not like that. If you look at the economy has got two variables. One is the price and one is the output. So you go to a shop, if you see too much high price, you buy less. If there's a sale going on, you buy little more. So these two are your decision-making thing, how much you will buy and what price you see. Okay, if the price is, if you want to keep the price when the economy faces a shock and you don't want the price to move, then all the adjustment happens to output. Mm. And when all that, say for example, there's a shock now, you know that. Mm. The COVID shock and the shock of the Ukraine unfortunate situation. So the prices are rising. And you don't, and this is the way, just like our body. If I have an infection and my temperature goes up, this is the way the body tries to fight. Mm. And if I want to keep my temperature down too much, I don't want it to go up too high, then I will die, of course. And then, but if you reduce it to too low, I can still die. And this is what is happening now. So trying to reduce it too low, you are inflicting greater damage to the output. Greater damage to the output means some good companies will also collapse because you will jack up the interest rate too high. And that this is an instrument which does not differentiate between good sector, bad sector. It does not differentiate. Sometimes, no, this inflation is happening not for every other item. Like now, our food prices going up, our energy prices going up. So how that is going to go down? So the inflation will go down, not because the fuel price or food price will go down. It will be because inflation is the average price. So these will remain high because the oil supply is not going to go up because Indonesia raised interest rate or Bangladesh raised interest or Australia raised interest rate. Food price is not going to go down. Some other prices will go down because you will be stopping, you will not be able to buy things that you normally would buy. You still have to buy petrol because you have to run your car and you have to still buy your food because otherwise you will starve. So your expenditure will go up in there, but then you adjust by not buying medicine, not buying clothes, not buying other things, not sending your kids to the school. Okay. So the damage will happen there.
Exactly. So that would be, I mean, this is one of the central principles of a purely market-driven economy that countries have been told to adopt. Obviously, with the idea of that we should be negotiating COVID recovery plans, it indicates that there should be a plan. Even in the US right now, the idea that there should be a plan and that government can actually take more of a role in supporting some elements of the economy is gaining greater support. Even the word plan itself was once taboo in the US. So the idea that government should have a plan rather than just leaving everything to the market. So with these COVID recovery plans, when social actors, unions and others speak to government about it using this resolution, what is it? What is the alternative? In terms of monetary policy, first of all, what would be the alternative proposal that unions should be making in these discussions for adoption?
Again, we give it a little bit of a history in here. You see, when the standard policy or the mainstream, I'm not trying to use the word new liberal deliberately because people may think it's a derogatory. So when they say, initially they say why you are targeting inflation, because money can only affect price, not output, not employment. So that was their views. And then, so if the monetary policy cannot do the any repair of the economy means not just inflation, but the real thing, the jobs and the output and investment. If money cannot play a role, what can? So it's the fiscal policy, of course, because these are the two policies government had, by and large. Then you have, I will talk about industry policy later. Then again, the mainstream says, no, you cannot have also fiscal policy, because they don't want basically government to do anything. Because if you have to do anything, you have to raise tax, you have a debt, all those things they will bring and to scare the government. Okay, so government gets scared. So what happened during the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, government actually initially responded, just like during COVID, government responded with the fiscal measures, gave relief here and there, which was good. And then immediately, because they know you keep scaremongering about the debt and all these things, government started retreating. And then they left everything to the monetary policy. So the people who said monetary policy cannot do any work, now they are keeping quiet. Okay, it's a monetary policy thing. And now the problem that happened, this monetary policy was uncoordinated. There was no plan. Who the monetary authority will give this money? So they were buying bonds from the market, right and left, even for a bad company they are buying. The company that is polluting, they are buying bonds. So you have allowed all the unviable or damaging industries to survive through this. So when the pandemic hit, your economy was already weak. When the Ukraine crisis came, your economy is already weak. Because these 10 years, you had an opportunity to coordinate fiscal and monetary policy, government deciding this sector needs money, you give money to that. That sector doesn't need money, don't give money to that. Okay, don't expand your credit to polluting industry. Expand your credit to the renewable sector. So that's why the industry policy come into the picture. So that was not there. There was no planning. And planning here is basically industry policy or sectoral policy, your policy for agriculture, policy for, so when we say industry policy, it doesn't mean only manufacturing.
No.
It's much broader, that sectoral policy. Let's say it's a sectoral policy to be, I think it's a better terminology rather than, because industry, people think only, poor country cannot have all the industries. So yeah, the countries that are getting. So this is the main problem we have.
Right.
So, and then there's another problem I would like to say. When we talk about debt, we have to make distinction between foreign debt and domestic debt. So in the discussion, when the debt has increased, domestic debt has got no limit. Because government can always borrow from the central bank. That's what the central bank's role is. But we need to be careful. If we allow government, because it may, we have corruption, we have abuse. That can happen whether you are borrowing or not borrowing. But we need to be vigilant. Our friends in the social movement have to be very, very vigilant against corruption, have to be very, very vigilant about where this money going, why are you borrowing? Are you borrowing for electioneering? Are you borrowing to pork barreling? Or are you borrowing to invest in a renewable sector? Are you borrowing it for an industry which is labor intensive, or skill formation, training the workers? So if I'm borrowing, yes, it may create a little bit of inflation. So what? Because I'm increasing the productive capacity. Every business borrows. Which business doesn't borrow?
Yes.
Why is borrowing? It's borrowed to buy a machine, to train the workers. Okay, if the company is borrowing only to pay their CEO, of course, that is wrong. And that is what is happening now. Because there's no plan. So the CEOs, they are borrowing and share buyback and jacking up the share price because they got the share options, making money. So this is the worst of the situation we have now.
So governments borrowing and then buying up private sector bonds, as you say, that bonds that could be in, in the worst possible industries, rather than actually issuing debt that is designed for jobs, right? And for public services. So I guess if this resolution says job rich, it really should be that those funds go to the sectors that create work, things like care, social care, which is very job rich, not the traditional idea of, industrial policy, but it's clear from the pandemic that it's required. But I guess the other part of that is, because I think this is an important point. Yesterday, there was a discussion in in the plenary about debt, and sometimes civil society hasn't distinguished between harmful debt and debt that can grow jobs and public services. And I think that's a really important point for at the conclusion here, is that we can't call for governments to stop taking on debt, but the issues are where it comes from, what the conditions are, and what it's going to do. And that's, I think, something that perhaps as a broader social movement needs to be understood a little better. So there's not just a blanket idea of treating all debt the same.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to just mention, because your paper, Anis, talks about things like that, as getting back to the central bank's role, we also covered the fact that central banks should have a role in creating employment. That should be part of their objective, is not only about inflation, but actually looking at growth of work and decent work, which would include increasing wages. So one thing about inflation, of course, is for workers, is that matched by an increase in wages, and the biggest problem is when that doesn't happen. So have you seen examples of, say, where the central banks do work with unions or others to really focus in on policy that creates jobs and improves wages?
You see, again, this is again, I would like to say these low wage policies that I tell you what, in 1997 or 98, in congressional hearing, Aaron Greenspan, the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank in America, said it very clearly that we are keeping inflation low by creating uncertainty in the labor market. So it's not just low wage, it's creating, this is a policy, as a governor, the chief of the central bank and the most important central bank systemically, saying that we create for uncertainty in the labor market deliberately. It's a criminal offense.
Yeah.
So that the workers cannot ask for higher wages. Because if you are in an uncertain situation, but what happens if you keep wages low? The companies there should be shutting down because they are not productive. They survive. So all the which survive. So if you look at the workers as only the trouble, you are actually not helping the economy. These people have got this view that union paying workers' wage is wrong. But you see, in the early 20th century, I don't remember the exact year, 905 or 906, something like that, very early on. Henry Ford doubled the wages of all his workers. And his colleagues thought he was a madman. How can you increase the double? All the wages across the board increased double. Then he said, the reason I did, if I don't pay the workers, who is going to buy my car? They have to have, so you have to think of the economy as a circular movement. If I don't pay a good wage, I will produce car, but there will be no buyer. And they will not have any commitment to my company. And few years later, German entrepreneur, which this Bosch electric company, right? B-O-S-C-H, Bosch.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He also increased the wages. But his argument was different. Ford's argument for the demand side. And his argument was creating the loyalty of the workers so that they become more productive, more committed. So you have to really look after. Even in the slavery, the slave owner once in a while will kill one or two slaves to scare the others. But will make sure the slaves get enough food so that they can come back tomorrow to work. But these capitalists now, what we have now, they even don't think about that. They want to squeeze the workers as much as they can. Take a lime. Okay, if you squeeze it too much, it gives no nice juice. But if you squeeze too much, it becomes bitter. Okay, so I'm giving you a practical example. So this is what it is. The central banks have a role to see that the wages are rising. And this is why I'm saying the central banks using only one blunt policy of interest rate, which cannot differentiate between productive sector and non-productive sector.
Right.
You have to encourage this. Yeah. And high wage, like Singapore used in the mid-80s, deliberately increased the wages. We in Australia used in the mid-80s to mid-90s. So what happens when you give wages even above productivity, average productivity, then two things happen. The companies that are, as productivity, say at par with productivity, companies which are below productivity, they will not survive and they should not survive.
No.
And the companies which are above the average, they find it still a little bit more they can get, and that makes them more, gives them more incentive because they are not competing with the rubbish companies. So that helps the economy move dynamically. If you look at productivity growth in the developed world, from 1970s, the productivity has been declining, growth declining, and it's almost zero productivity growth. So by squeezing the workers, what have you done? From now 50 years of declining productivity growth or a stagnant productivity growth. And now you can say economy is still growing. We have 3%, 4% growth. This growth is coming only from the financial sector, where all this speculation happening, house prices going up. The GDP is everything accounted in GDP. So you have growth coming from the sectors which are not productive. That's why now you are finding yourself not being able to compete with China.
That's right.
I'm not saying everything China is doing right, but why America suddenly fell behind? Now you find that Western countries are all behind, and now you are finding ways how to contain China. Well, good luck. For last 50 years, you did not invest in the training of the workers, in their well-being. No, you created uncertainty. These guys cannot sleep. How can they become productive next day?
Right. I mean, it reminds me when you were talking about Ford and, thinking that there needed to be an economy where workers could buy things. The opposite, of course, is when Citibank released its internal memo that said they recognised that the world, particularly the US, had become a plutocracy, and therefore investments should be in the most expensive items, that the only worthwhile investments were in yachts or in diamonds or in expensive labour, because they're the only people with money. And as you say, you can get an artificial growth. You can get an artificial growth because suddenly, our public services are privatised, so there's more money circulating because we have to pay for things we used to have. Or you might get artificial growth because share prices have gone up, or housing costs more. But there's no real growth in living in sustainable life or in the enjoyment of life for people. So I guess that's another key component in the advocacy we should be doing with these plans, is not centering the idea of GDP growth, but actually other forms of growth of employment, growth of wages, growth of time even that people have. Because as you said, workers are having to work so many hours that, being squeezed. So these are alternative ways that we should be thinking when we talk about growth. It's not GDP growth. War grows the GDP. Sometimes, obviously the pandemic has growth for the health sector. That doesn't mean that's beneficial. So perhaps that's another central point for the plans. I wanted to let people know, of course, that they could put questions or in the chat, or they can raise hands as well. I know that there's a lot of information that Anis has about how the plans should be framed, that needs a bit of thinking by a lot of us, and certainly for unions we'll be doing further work. This is really just to share in this forum of the APPFSD. Can
I add one point?
Yes, please, Anis.
Yeah. Whenever the GDP growth figure comes out in a country, and if it is a good figure, the government tries to highlight that, take credits and things, that's fine. What our people should be asking is growth coming from which sector? Growth for whom? For example, I give an example, and it is a very shocking example. And when I was in ESCAP, I wrote that, and people thought it was too shocking, and they didn't want to include it. But I tried to give shock, but I'm repeating it. Say construction is a very highly GDP contributing factor. The government can increase the GDP by just investing in construction. Say, for example, you can build concentration camp. I use the word concentration, but that's what they did not like, because it has got a bad connotation. But I deliberately use the word concentration just to give a shock. GDP will grow, but what have you done? You created concentration camp. Okay, you don't want concentration camp, you want housing. You can have housing for the rich. You can have housing for the workers, low income people, public housing. So there is a choice that can be made within the same budget, same envelope. So whenever GDP figure comes, I see a lot of debate. Is it 5% or 5.1 or 2? No, is the government fudging the number by a percentage point here? It's irrelevant to me. Even our academic friends, think tanks, do not ask this question. This is that's why I wanted to shock them. Yeah. Because my frustration is there. Okay, why you argue with 1 decimal point here, 1 decimal point there? What is the real question? It's coming from where? Is it coming from polluting sectors? I don't want that go. Yeah. Simple as it is. If that is coming from in Bangladesh, from shipbreaking, affecting the environment, affecting the health of my workers, unprotected, I don't want that to happen. I don't care. I want a good air to be able to breathe. I want my workers, my people to be healthy. That's it. Okay. And if, again, it's coming from, not coming from the polluting and health affecting things, fine. Coming from sector which is adding to the inequality. It's not helping middle class, low income workers. Now workers are asking for higher wages. Why? Because they can't pay rent. They can't pay the health. Why government cannot, or the employers in collaboration with the government, they can have, okay, government can give land, employers can build housing for the workers. Their health sector can be, there can be school for the kids of the workers working in some industrial complex. A dedicated, nice, state-of-the-art hospital. The workers will not ask for higher wages. You spend for once for all life investment for a company, for a government, and your deficit can go up. No problem. But imagine how productive the workers will be. They don't have to worry about their children's education. They don't have to worry about getting onto the bus, missing the bus, missing the time, wasting the time on the street, polluting the air because the buses are all stuck in the traffic and engine running. Why can't we have that? Yeah. Very simple solution. But and I think, in
history, there was, in one point in history, that was acceptable. It was, accepted that planning parts of the economy that are most important was critical. And yet, it's only in the last few decades where the idea is that growth that's left to the market is the way that we need to manage. And I think the most important takeaway, I think, for this resolution is around that idea that we need to look at what the plan is, as you said, sectoral plans. And importantly, the resolution actually says that, as I said earlier, sectoral plans. And so identifying which sectors are required, how to grow them, how to grow employment, but decent work. And of course, we think it's also how to grow trade unionism, because the only way really to ensure that workers are paid properly is through strong, powerful unions who can make sure that happens. And with that, I might just move along. I'm hoping we can come back. We'll have time to come back at the end, Anna, specifically for the recommendations. But I'm just going to give some time to Brother Amarsanaa. So that
there are some questions in the chat box also.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just looking at them now.
Okay.
Now there is one question from Nargis Jahan from Bangladesh. Is central bank bound to implement their IFS priorities policies? This is very important information here in Australia. We have a lot of borrowing from our government, pork barreling. All we feel free to say.
I think it's today's budget. I'm sure the budget will be pork barreling. But, But let me just first go to Brother Amarsanaa, and then we can take other questions in the chat box and come back. And most importantly, I think as well is the recommendations that we capture at the end. As I mentioned, this resolution is only effective if we can have unions utilising them. And I know that in Mongolia, at least there's been an agreement to create some form of COVID recovery plan. So we've invited Brother Amarsanaa to come and speak about what unions, both the public sector, but also more broadly the Confederation, are doing to try and shape the COVID recovery in Mongolia. Over to you, Brother Amarsanaa. Can you perhaps outline for us what's happening in Mongolia?
Thank you, Sister Kate, and hello to all. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank to PSI giving me such opportunity to sharing our experiences on the human-centered recovery from the coronavirus pandemic and the resilient for the inclusive social protection and sustainable economic growth. Yeah. As we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has made us to work main strategic priorities in the country, such as an inclusive social protection and economic growth opportunity and sustainable green economy and climate-friendly development. In trade unions in Mongolia, we've been actively involved in the shaping the country's COVID-19 recovery plan through the human-centered development, while it's involved innovating to boost the climate change response, strengthen the business environment, especially for the small and medium-sized enterprises, and also ensure that the COVID-19 recovery drives the reform in areas such as health and social protection. I want to highlight some activities carried out by the Confederation of Mongolian Trade Union since the beginning of the COVID-19. You know, they're based on the decision of the Presidential Council of the CMTU to prevent and protect the population from the coronavirus pandemic. The first decision was made to let employee to work shorter hours. The call was supported and followed by the affiliated unions throughout the country. You know, the CMTU, we have 36 affiliated unions from industrial and also the provinces. CMTU also participated in the inspection work at the registration offices of the civil servants who were working in the road inspection checkpoints in accordance with the cooperation agreement with the state inspection agency. The union proposal was submitted to the Director General of the National Emergency Management Agency to improve the unsafe and unprotected and high-risk working conditions. The CMT also, in cooperation with its own staff, and provided some supportive measures, like providing a lunch and dinner to the government officials who are inspecting their road checkpoints and during this pandemic period. Also, we have launched a fundraising campaign to help infected citizens and also provide a lot of emotional support. The CMTU has also initiated a call for the assistance and support for the health and frontline workers of the country. The trade unions also launched a donation action within its affiliated unions and hand them over to their members who are in need. For example, the Mongolian Health Workers Union donated some money and health equipment to the country's emergency commission, and also the public water and supply sewage Sewerage Workers Union have also donated face masks, over 200,000 face masks to the Emergency Authority, and organized a campaign to providing some vitamins to the trade union members. The government of Mongolia also supported the union appeals or call and CMTU initiatives, and is determined to take following actions in relation to the pandemic. This includes a kind of exception from the social insurance tax to be paid by the enterprises and organizations, and not to collect the income tax from the salary of employers 2 years, like a 2020 and 2021. There is no tax collection or taxes on the companies, and with income less than 1.5 billion tugriks, and for a certain period of time, it means 2020 and 2021. Also, the government provides 200,000 tugrik per month to the private companies who are maintaining jobs, and also provided 3 billion Mongolian tugriks in loan to support the herders and other small and medium-sized enterprises with a 3% interest rate. It is a kind of accelerating or boosting small and medium-sized enterprises in order to increase the economic growth. Also, the government decided to increase the child allowances by the 100,000 tugrik from 10,000 tugrik as a compensation due to the suspension of all levels of educational institutions. In the framework of the social partnership, the Prime Minister of Mongolia called a meeting, non-regular tripartite meeting with the Ministry of Labor and the Mongolian Employees Federation, including Confederation of Mongolian Trade Unions, and discussed the issue of how to protect the Mongolian citizens from the pandemic impacts in order to support the social and economic sustainability, and also the employment protection, and in order to protect the purchasing power and income of all the citizens of Mongolia. Based on the fact that there are almost 300 to 400 workers, 300,000 workers in the informal economy, they're covered by the government's responses to the coronavirus pandemic, the campaign, and some special measures to increase the income of the target group, the vulnerable groups, and create job opportunities for them, and also they're giving them some opportunities to access the public services. As a result of this trade union repeated appeals and call, the suggestions and demands to the government, the representative of the trade unions joined a working group to monitor the implementation of the government's measures relevant to the COVID-19 pandemic. Very, very recently, the 2 or 3 weeks ago, government has launched a new revival policy, which is the countermeasure to recover this COVID-19 pandemic in a human-centered the government policy. And the CMTU has expressed its support for the policy, and through the national tripartite agreement on labor and social consensus, in particular to preserve the jobs and social expand its social coverage, social insurance coverages, and also the expanding the medical insurance coverage to all citizens of Mongolia, and increase the public service wages, and promote the health and safe work in order to increase this occupational safety and health. This ILO, the resolution number 1, especially on the recovery from this COVID-19 pandemic. So we, in order to boost our economy, we are using these social tripartite mechanisms to consulting with the government and employers federations. We also call them more attention should be paid by our supporting economic opportunities and directing all the projects and programs provided by the international financial institutions to the people, and also to improving the quality life of ordinary citizens. Last December, we had a CMTU Congress organized, and the new leaders of trade union leaders were elected. And also we have determined or defined our long-term trade union development strategy in line with the Mongolia's development goals, like a Mongolian sustainable development vision. And we also have now begun to publicize this kind of policy documents throughout the country using our affiliated unions. And in the last, but not the least, the trade unions in Mongolia committed to achieving the prosperous, social inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth through the promotion of the social dialogue. So we're going to we planned to have this national tripartite agreement in May. We sent our demand letter to Ministry of Labor and also the Federation of Employers Federation, and it's supposed to be happen in May. So in order to boost the country's economic growth, we have to follow this revival policy of the government, offered by the government. So trade unions in Mongolia, we've been actively involving in this country's development-related issues, especially the recovery plan from this global pandemic, COVID-19. As you know, the Mongolia is a landlocked country, and we have only 2 giant neighbors. One is Russia, who is in a war with Ukraine, and also the China, which is one of the world's most leading economy, which is has a lot of many cases and closed their borders for many months. So it also influence on the country's economy, especially the Mongolian extractive industries. We are selling our minerals to China and in the world through these Chinese borders, the gold and coal, copper, and all the extractive industry products. So we are facing nowadays a big problem due to these global pandemics. But in order to overcome this kind of difficulties, Union is quite actively engaging with this government policy. And
Right.
we are very thankful to having taken your questions and to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thank you, Brother Amarsanaa. It's really interesting, to hear about your national experience and the fact that there is already social dialogue to produce the COVID recovery plan, as well as the plans in May for further social dialogue. Hopefully we can also, provide the recommendations that Anis has produced on what, on how that social dialogue perhaps should consider the key recommendations from the resolution. I was a bit surprised when you said that the government suspended tax payments for even large companies, because, I mean, some companies have profited during the pandemic. And as Anna said, I guess with spending, we want to target spending towards the sectors that we most want to develop, renewable energies or high employment. But the same, I think, applies for tax breaks. It should be tax breaks that are targeted to the industries that we think need help, that are good for the economy. I mean, I know it was in local currency. It sounded like a lot of money when you said
yes,
billion.
yeah.
Maybe it's not as much as I thought it was.
Yeah.
But maybe Anis, did you have any comments on that?
I exactly echo the same as you said, and this is the reason why your fiscal and monetary policy cannot coordinate without having sectoral policies. That's why the ILO resolution has put all these three together. This is actually very significant why it put these three together. And in many ways, in my paper, I said this resolution is actually a path-breaking resolution from that point of view. Because if you look at, the way it is put in there, and the word supportive, for example, meaning the fiscal and monetary policy should be supportive of each other and also of the economy. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I'm in a meeting now. Talk to you.
It's not always easy to see the words that are important, right? So there's a few words in this resolution that are different than some of the other resolutions, including different than even the SDGs, because it does look at planning, sectoral planning, as you said, support of each other, and not providing and not suggesting that monetary, that we have to focus simply on monetary policy, or I guess the economic policies are focused around broad GDP growth. So I just wanted to
as interest rate.
Sorry, just Anna.
Yeah.
I just want to let everybody know that I put in the chat the recommendations from your paper, so that if we run out of time, I'm proposing that people look at the recommendations. These are the sort of summary of the recommendations that came from the very significant, work that Anis did. And one way we could use those is through this workshop, submitting it to the broader forum for the APPFSD. And so if you'd like to, I'm being asked to post the link again. I think, is it not working? Which I guess these recommendations are basically the summary of all of what Anis has been talking about what should governments be doing to implement this resolution. And people might like to have a look at that and see if they agree or have further questions about whether they could be part of the outcome of this particular workshop that we can submit. So sorry, if Anis, you go ahead. I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to that.
No, I'm just going to say that just as you mentioned about the tax thing, the interest rate I mentioned can be a very blanket policy or can be a targeted policy. Same with the tax, same with the subsidies, and same government purchase. Government has spent a lot of money in purchasing goods and services. From who do I buy if I'm a government? So I should not buy from a company which is abusing their workers. So for example, I should not buy from a company which is abusing the environment. So, I mean, government can actually, by that kind of simple decision, can have a huge impact. I'm not interfering with the market. I'm not blocking the market, but I'm giving a clear signal. And this is the responsibility of the government. Government job is not just to get elected and go to the parliament and discuss things and then draw salary. Because when the government, in a democracy, this is why I'm not in favor of having fiscal rules or central bank rules and things, because in that way, you are not allowing the political parties to debate issues, because you have a rule, everybody has to follow the rule. Then what is the choice between party A and party B? So that's why now all the energies of the political system goes into pork barreling, because there is no issues, no policy issues. As I said, I don't have to blow the budget. Within the budget, I can make a choice. Shall I buy from K or I brother Amarsanaa? I mean, I can make that choice. And then during the election time, this should be manifesto.
And of course,
So to say that some party is irresponsible, cannot manage the economy, no, these are irrelevant debate.
That's right. I mean, one problem we have is that global trade rules, for example, have really constrained governments in being able to make those decisions. And that is the very purpose of many trade rules that have been promoted by multinationals. Some foreign investors don't want governments to say, well, actually, we would like a local industry. And this pandemic has shown us the danger of that, partly because of the supply chain problems. And that particularly applies to the things we all need. I mean, it's one thing to not have any comment on, making plastic toys or something, that it really wouldn't matter where they come from. But when it comes to something like vaccines, medicines, renewable technologies, even digital technology that we need, the government has surrendered the capacity to say, well, actually, we're going to promote industry here. We want our own local vaccine production industry. We want our own local, solar energy industry, which happened in India when it tried to create solar energy industry. The US and Australia took it to the World Trade Organization to challenge the idea of a national solar. So I think these are all the examples of what happens when we surrender any capacity to plan industry policy or sectoral industry policy that we need to alter and really target them towards job rich, which is what the resolution says, job rich, but also that sustainable, equitable investments in the economy. Now I don't know if there's anybody who wants to ask further questions or make comments, particularly if anybody has any recommendations they'd like to add or any comments on the recommendations that we're suggesting are submitted as an outcome of the meeting. Any comments or questions? No. I'd be particularly keen to hear if there are other unions who are planning to engage government in this discussion around the resolution and how to implement it. And I know we've got other unions on the line, so it'd be quite interesting to hear if anybody else has any plans. I know there's a lot to take in because this is not always the area that unions are engaging in, particularly the monetary policy, fiscal policy. We're perhaps more accustomed to discussing industrial policy. But just before, while we're, anybody can feel free to comment or make a recommendation. But one of the things we've discussed before, Anis, is that in the past, and perhaps still in some countries, trade unions, but maybe even other social actors, have actually been members of the central bank board. And I guess by being there, they've been able to somehow redirect or influence the policy to really focus a bit more on this sectoral policy or the conditions that should be priorities for monetary policy. I mean, what do you think about that? Is that something that unions should be promoting now? And also are there others that should be on the central bank board?
Normally what we see in most countries, the central bank boards are dominated by business groups. So there is no balance there. So, and the starting point is that the narrative is now the business creates wealth. So they are called wealth creators. These terminologies are loaded and politically motivated terminologies. The moment you say, no, these they are wealth creators, then the rest of us are all by default wealth destroyers. So that is how they put it, even though they don't say it is a class war there. Mm. So, when you ask for wages, then they say, oh, no, you are waging class war. But when they put this in that they are wealth creators, so the central bank has to listen to the wealth creators. So even if you have, say, symbolically, you bring one union member there, that person will be overwhelmed, and then will be also saying, what do you know about the economy? These are all technical matters. So basically what we need, of course, we need a central, the union representation. We need to broaden the central bank board. Then there has to be gender balance, for example. Because there are issues that the decisions are taken which affects the family, that affects the women disproportionately. So different, I don't like the word stakeholder. Different right holders should be represented. Central bank should be more inclusive. It should represent the society, not just one group, believing that they are the wealth creator and everything will follow from that wealth creation. So it's a very trickle-down view of the world. If wealth is created and everyone will benefit, that we have to confront, right? Front and back.
We know that the wealth creators are actually workers. The workers are the ones that create. They don't get to keep the wealth, but they're the ones that create wealth. I mean, it's an interesting point on also the central bank needs to reflect others, as you say, rights holders. It's a very good point that we need to use the language of rights holders, not stakeholders, because stakeholders allows big business to take over.
And all sorts of people can become stakeholders. Even the foreigners can claim on the national government.
Well, that's right. That's another thing that trade agreements do.
And one other thing I would like to mention here, because it has got implication for the workers. We're talking about fiscal space, where from money will come and things like that. The donor communities, or that we now call them development partners, they have reneged on the promise of transferring 0.7% of the GNI for a long time. More than half a century, this promise has not been. So to bypass their responsibility, they are now talking about, private sector will invest. So that will transfer. So you open your capital account, capital will come, and so you don't need this. And then that capital is very volatile. And that capital you have to borrow, that doesn't come. And so that's how your debt crisis is happening. So you have to make distinction between domestic debt and the foreign debt. So these are technical issues, but not rocket science that our friends in the union movement will not understand. Okay, so we have to make that distinction. And very simple. We are not talking, okay. Then there is an issue of remittances. Now, remittances are shown by the World Bank, by the IMF. Unfortunately, the UN has fallen into that trap as resource transfer. What is the difference between a worker sending money from Dhaka to a remote village and a worker sending money from Doha to a remote village. It's the same. It's a worker's wage.
Yeah.
Wage is not meant to be invested. Wage is meant to be consumed, to be spent on children's education, to be spent on your health care, to have your life in. And if there is any saving left after that, then we can talk about it. So now there is talk about creating diaspora bond and things, and the workers will be confused. All those workers working overseas, with their sweat, and then then the stock market, all these financial speculators will swindle this money. So we have to be very careful that and tell the World Bank and the IMF and the government, do not treat remittance as development funding. Remittance is a wage, and it should be created. The fact that wage is coming in foreign exchange makes no difference when you are exporting something. So you are exporting your labor services. I feel very frustrated with our economist friend. It's even wrong. In the balance of payment, it is recorded in the current account. It's not in the capital account. It is just like when you are remitting, like the multinationals, they remit the profit, they remit the interest rate, and we remit the wages in the reverse way. So it settles there. Yeah. It's not a capital account item.
No, that's right. I mean, it really is wrong that it's part of the Sustainable Development Goals to see remittances as an alternative indicator to ODA, as you said.
Yeah.
I know
so it's not.
No. Yesterday
we
there
have
were
to really raise those issues in our discussions.
We do. And yesterday I know there was one of the representatives of migrant workers in this forum who did mention that this is not development. So I think as part of our recommendations, we can include that as one of the outcomes here. But we are out of time. And I know that, like, Anis, you could talk about this for hours, and we do want to spend.
Okay. No, I feel very passionate about all these issues. That's why I know sometimes I go off the track. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really important. Pleased. It is really important because, I mean, we can't leave economic debates to those who have monopolized the discussion. Unfortunately, like, I know it's not popular anymore to talk about the ruling class, but the neoliberal ideas or economic, supply side economics, whatever you want to call it, are actually ruling class ideas to benefit the ruling class. And we never talk about that. We just talk about it as if these are just economic principles, right? But they're not. They're ideas that have been developed to really structure the world in a way that benefits those few. And as the union movement previously did a lot of political education, but unions being attacked so much has sort of meant that some of that hasn't happened so much, that we haven't had the space or time, capacity to do this political education about what are ruling class ideas and how do we counter them. So what are our ideas about the economy and how do we push those is really critical. So I'm really grateful that we had this space, even though it's only, 1 hour and a half. And I hope that some of you who have attended have been able to get benefit out of this. But as I said, PSI will be doing more, and our intention in the future is also to do country-based so that we can look a little bit more at the specifics of each country. And then it can provide that practical example of what Anis is really talking about when we get down and look at, well, what's your country currently, how is it framing its economy? And we really look forward to expressions of interest from our affiliates around that, but also working with others. I mean, the ILO, whose job it is to implement this resolution, and the social movements who really should be using this more than many other resolutions or UN instruments that are out there. So I know our time is finished, and I want to again thank our speakers. So Anis and Brother Amarsanaa, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to the interpreters for helping us with our Indonesian, and thank everybody for attending and for my colleagues for helping to organise this. And we'll look forward to submitting our recommendations and being together again in the not